Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored Never Boring. You join me very briefly at my painting station where I'm just putting the finishing touches to Jelson Darroch from Warhammer Quest Cursed City. He's all painted up, varnished and based now, so the last thing I have to do is prepare him for storage. And like with many of my other miniatures, that means putting a magnet under the base to store him in a crate layered with rubber steel sheets. I've talked about how I store miniatures in numerous videos before, so I'm not going to labour the point. But for miniatures with deep bases, like Games Workshop miniatures, I use these magnets. They are 5mm by 2mm neodymium magnets, and they're pretty cheap. I got these from First for Magnets, and I believe I ordered through Amazon. Anyway, drop of glue goes under the base, and then you apply the magnet and wait for the glue to cure. You want the glue to completely cure before you put the miniature in your storage crate, because as the glue dries it creates a white residue, and that will get all over the rubber steel sheet and it just won't look very nice. Normally I store my miniatures in 4-litre plastic crates from the Really Useful Box Company. These are a good size for regular human-sized miniatures, and I can store them 3 high and 3 wide on my shelves, which is very convenient. However, there are a lot of miniatures in Cursed City, and a few of them are quite large. The Vargscar in particular isn't going to fit in a 4-litre crate. So for Cursed City I'm using a 9-litre crate, and I'm going to store the miniatures on 2 levels. If I take the lid off the crate, you can see I have created a little insert shelf. This is just 3mm foam core with more rubber steel sheet stuck on the top of it. I used a self-adhesive rubber steel because it's more convenient, and then you can see I created little legs for it to stand on, making sure those legs were high enough so that the shelf stood higher than the Vargscar, but low enough that I could still put human-sized miniatures on top of the shelf without them bumping their heads on the underside of the crate lid. For those of you with an inquisitive nature, that means the legs are approximately 80mm tall. I cut some little finger loops so I could easily remove the shelf, and when I do, you can see we have all of our Cursed City miniatures all painted up predominantly using Army Painter Speedpaints. If you're interested in how I painted these, just look through the Cursed City playlist on my channel and you will find videos for everything you see here. For now, I'm just going to get all the miniatures out and we can do a little panning shot while I give my final thoughts on Speedpaints. So, when I started this series, my intention was just to use Army Painter Speedpaints, but I quickly realised that wasn't going to be entirely possible. I did use Speedpaints as much as possible, but for metallic items I laid down a base coat of a metallic paint first, and when it came to the bases, I used Citadel paints. The bases, by the way, I have kept purposefully simple. Quite commonly I will keep my bases to a texture paint with a dry brush, maybe some flock grass and other debris like stones. I do that so I can port miniatures between games without too much concern. For example, my D&D stuff all gets the most basic grey finish because it doesn't detract from the miniatures and is nondescript enough that it doesn't look out of place in houses, temples, dungeons, open fields and forests. But I digress. Getting back to Cursed City in particular, there were occasions where I just wasn't happy with the finish I got from the speed paints, and I ended up doing some layering and highlights with Citadel paints just to get them to a standard I was okay with. That was mainly when using some specific colours which I feel Army Painter hasn't quite got the formula right for, namely Blood Red, Hive Dweller Purple and Highland Blue. With that being the case, here are my final takeaways on speed paints. They're good. They really are an excellent tool for getting things done quickly. It is possible to paint miniatures in a fraction of the time. If you're trying to power through a board game like Zombicide, or you've got 60 Poxwalkers to paint, this is an excellent solution. Obviously I also used them for character models for Cursed City, and I think everything turned out looking good, even though occasionally I had to do a little extra work using more traditional methods. And you can use the speed paints in conjunction with other painting methods. Much was made of the reactivation that occurs with these paints when they first came out, and I did address that in its own video, so I'm not going to say too much about it here, other than to say, yes, reactivation can occur. But it hasn't been a problem for me with everything I have done so far. I have layered, washed and dry brushed over speed paints without too much issue, just making sure I left the speed paints for a long time to dry first. However, to be on the safe side, I have sometimes put a coat of spray varnish over the speed paints before doing the finishing touches, and I think that's probably always worth doing. And of course, as with anything you paint, you should give the finished thing a coat of varnish too. I recommend the spray varnish and tend to use Army Painter's anti-shine. So, I do like the speed paints, but am I going to keep using them? Short answer is yes, but here's the longer answer. First of all, when the Cursed City expansions come out, I will paint those with speed paints to maintain a consistent style across the whole game. Also, I may use speed paints to paint full miniatures when I'm in a real hurry. I'm thinking if I suddenly need a group of enemies painted up before a D&D meeting that weekend or something along those lines. Or if there's something I would like to see colorized but which I feel I would never get around to if I intended to use traditional methods. For the most part, speed paints are just going to be something I add to my painting repertoire to use on small details when painting something using traditional methods. As a recent example, I used the speed paints on some of the little details on the Masters of the Universe battleground terrain, such as the crawling vines and some of the insignias carved into the walls. It just saved me a bit of time as I didn't have to worry about layering and highlights on those small details. And there are several reasons why speed paints aren't going to be my go-to method of painting for everything. The biggest reason is I'm a traditionalist at heart. I enjoy layering, washing and highlighting stuff. I get a greater sense of satisfaction from doing things that way. I think it makes for better videos and it's just more fun for me. Speed paints can get good results, but once the initial kick of being able to paint so fast wears off, it starts to get a bit, well, boring really. By the time I was finished with Cursed City, I really had done enough speed painting and was ready to give it a break. And that's not to say everyone will find it boring, but for me it started to make painting miniatures feel like something a bit more mechanical than I want it to be. The other reason I don't intend to use speed paints more often is because I don't feel like I have as much control with them as with traditional methods. I'm more at the whims of the paint itself. For example, I tried really hard to get good results with Hive Dweller Purple, and I think a lot of that was down to the formulation of the paint itself. Furthermore, during particularly hot weather, I don't think the paint gives the same quality of finish as it dries a bit too quickly. That's not an insurmountable issue, but I like a bit more consistency when I'm painting. I like to know that when I use a specific colour of paint, it's going to look like it did the last time I used it. But there we have it. I like speed paints. I am incredibly impressed with what is possible with them. It's exciting to be able to paint a whole game to a decent standard without too much effort, and I will carry on using them. But not all the time, and probably not for many projects as large as this one. And that's about it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider pressing the like button. If you've really enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so, and hopefully I'll see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.